everybody, and welcome to WTF Hammer Underworlds. Today is going to be yet another Season 2 Warband review video, this time looking at the Godsworn Hunt, who basically entered Shadespire looking for worthy sacrifices to pledge to the Chaos Gods in general. So as I always do, I'm going to be taking a look at this Warband's fighter cards, their faction-specific cards, and then I'm going to be rating this Warband on a scale of S to D, S being amazing, D needing lots of support, and I'll be starting by looking at this Warband's fighter cards. Now this Warband was unique when it first came out because it was the first Warband that only had 6 units, none of which are too powerful across the board, as you can tell just by looking at the wound characteristic. And they all actually inspire the same way, which is fairly challenging, which is to apply an upgrade to the fighter. So based on that alone, it's very clear that you shouldn't expect all of these units to get inspired unless you really want to spread out your upgrades. But regardless of that, let's just take a look at these units more closely. Starting with the leader, who's Thedra Skullscryer, who is the only wizard in this group, starting with a 1 wizard characteristic, becoming 2 when inspired, which is interesting because it can be combined with a certain upgrade, which name I'm forgetting, that adds a magic characteristic to units who only have 1, which means you can have potential of 3 or even 4 with Well of Power as her magic characteristic. Her melee attack is pretty decent, especially when she's inspired. 2 hammers, 2 damage, then going to 3 damage. Everything else is kind of subpar. I mean, the movement's pretty good with 4, but 1 dodge, defense, 3 wounds, very squishy. And similar things can be said about Grundon, who is basically identical, minus the fact that he is not a spellcaster. Next is Shond Headclaimer, who is a little bit more accurate when inspired. The 3 Fury attack accuracy with Cleave, doing 2 damage though. Also, I guess upgrades from a dodge to a shield when getting inspired. Similarly, 3 wounds like the previous units. Now all the rest of the units only have 2 wounds. Jaggerthra has 1 dodge, but goes up to 5 movement when inspired. Has a nice javelin ability where when she charges and throws her javelin, she does an extra damage with it, although it's kind of a one-shot deal. Then the Dark Oath knife is not especially exceptional. Next there's Olo, who is purely range, not very good at it until he's inspired, and then he's fairly accurate. Actually gets 2 dodge when inspired, which is nice. As well as his trusty dog Grawl, who similarly gets more accurate when inspired and has good movement with 5 movement and then 2 dodge, which is nice. And that does it for the whole Warband. So let's take a look at this Warband's fighter cards, pros and cons. Starting with the pros is that they have a spellcaster, which is nice in the sense of the versatility. They have a few range attack actions, which is also nice. Good movement, I mean 4 is the minimum. They have a couple units who can cleave when inspired though. Decently high accuracy, but only when inspired. The accuracy is actually pretty poor across the board before being inspired. And they do have a large model number, which does grant them a lot of versatility in terms of the types of things that they can do each round. However, there are a few cons. First thing I'm going to mention is their difficult inspiring mechanic, and it's not so much that it's difficult, more that it's costly. You really have to commit to upgrading a unit in order to inspire them, and I mean, it just sort of makes it so that a lot of units are just not going to get inspired because it's not worth the risk of equipping an item on them only for them to be wiped out with their 2 wound characteristic. Which brings me to the low wounds. I mean, 3 wounds is the highest in this Warband, which is pretty pathetic. It's low. None of these guys can reliably survive any attacks. Poor defense. I mean, only a couple units have 2 dodge. The rest is either 1 dodge or shield. And they have no special abilities. I mean, there's Jaggerthra's Spear, which does an extra damage, but I mean, I don't really count that as a special ability. So clearly are some flaws to this Warband, but definitely are some pros as well. So now let's get a better view of this Warband by taking a look at their objective cards. Starting with their Surge objective cards, we have a Worthy Deed. Worth 1 glory point, score immediately if a friendly fighter takes an enemy fighter with a wounds characteristic of 4 or more out of action with an attack action. So I'm giving this a B. I mean, it could be an A because it's fairly reliable, but it's a little bit tricky to pull off in the first round unless you commit 2 to 3 guys, maybe even more if you're rolling some misses to attacking a single unit. Although with their movement and their range capability, it is possible to actually just pepper a unit until they get taken out of action by attacks. Next is Magical Apotheosis. Score this immediately if a friendly fighter successfully casts a spell that requires 2 or more successes, worth 1 glory point. I'm giving this a B as well, because obviously only Thedra can cast this, and she's pretty easy to wipe out. So if you draw this in a late round and she's been taken out of action, you won't be able to profit from this. Also requires that she be inspired so that she can actually roll 2 dice in order to try to cast a spell that involves 2 dice, and also forces you to put a spell gambit into your deck that has a cost of 2 of some kind, and then she has to successfully do it. So I mean, lots of variables that make this hard to pull off. Next, there's a worthy kill. Score this immediately when a friendly fighter makes an attack action that takes an enemy fighter with a wounds characteristic of 4 or more out of action, but worth 2. So the exact same thing as a worthy deed, but just outright better, worth 2 glory points. I'm giving this an S. It's very nice. So that does it for the Surge. As far as the score in the end phase cards go, we're going to start with Dark Rewards. Score this in an end phase if all surviving friendly fighters, at least 3, are inspired, worth 1 glory point. I'm giving this a D. I mean, it's only reliable to pull off if most of your units have been taken out of action, unless you really want to dedicate to a style in which you spend your glory points to put upgrades on all of your guys, but then it's only worth 1 glory in an end phase, so not really worth it in my opinion. Glory or Damnation. Score this in an end phase if a surviving friendly fighter has 3 or more upgrades, worth 1 glory. I mean, this is better. I'll give it a B. You have 2 to 3 main units that you will want to put most of your upgrades on, so it's not unlikely that 1 unit will get 3 upgrades. Oath of Annihilation. Score, you may reveal this card at the start of your first activation in the action phase, then return it to your hand. Score this in end phase if all enemy fighters are out of action. If you reveal this card, gain an additional glory point. So it's 5 glory point Annihilation, potentially worth 6 if you reveal it. I'm giving it a C because it's really hard to pull off Annihilation, although I do kind of like this card because if you do dedicate yourself to intense aggro and are successful at it, this is a cash cow. Oath of Murder, and this is interesting about all the Oath cards, is that you can reveal them at the start of your first activation in an action phase. So you reveal it so that your enemy knows what your plan is, then you can get an extra glory point if you do things that way. You score this in end phase if Warband took an enemy leader out of action in the preceding action phase, so you can get 2 glory potentially for taking out a leader if you declare it beforehand. I'm giving this a B because it is actually tough to score. Definitely tough to take out a leader in general, especially if you broadcast it, but it could be nice to sort of play on the emotions of the enemy who then starts to hide their leader and maybe doesn't act the way that they would have planned to do if you didn't reveal this card. So this card does have some nuances to it. Oath of Supremacy, it's basically supremacy. You score 3 glory if you hold 3 objectives, but if you declare it, it becomes 4 glory. I mean, it's just a better version of Supremacy. I'm giving it an A because you have 6 units, so it's pretty realistic to pull it off, although declaring that game plan might make it harder to pull it off, of course. And that does it for the score in the end phase, and then there's 2 score in the third end phase cards, which is Oath of Conquest and then Oath of Denial. Oath of Conquest is basically all your units in enemy territory. If you declare it beforehand, you can get 3 glory, which is very nice. I'm giving that an A. And then Denial is the same thing, but keeping enemy units out of your own territory, which is actually very difficult to pull off because it relies heavily on the actions of your opponent. So I'm giving this one a B, maybe a C, but it is potentially worth 4. And you can kind of decide in the heat of the moment if you want to reveal it or not reveal it. So I mean, it's okay. The Oath cards are pretty good. So just to give a quick overview, the objective cards promote taking enemy fighters out of action, holding objectives, casting spells, equipping upgrades, advancing into enemy territory, and keeping enemies out of friendly territory while broadcasting it for extra glory points. Next, and finally, we're going to move on to the power cards. Starting with the ploys, there's Brutal Sacrifice. Choose a friendly fighter adjacent to another friendly fighter and an upgrade in your hand that can be applied to the fighter you chose. The fighter is taken out of action and the upgrade is applied to the fighter you choose. So basically sacrifice an adjacent fighter to equip an upgrade on the fighter that you choose. I'm giving that a D because I'd rather just spend a glory point than wipe out a unit. Dark Destiny. As a reaction, play this during an attack action that would take a friendly fighter out of action. Roll a defense dice. On a roll of shield or crit, the fighter takes no damage and is not driven back and is not taken out of action. So it's kind of like Last Chance a little bit, which is pretty nice. I'm giving this an A because it could save a fighter, and these guys really need saving with their low defense and low wounds. Dark Portent. As a reaction, play this during an attack action that targets a friendly fighter. Before the attack roll, rolls of crit in the attack roll are not successes or critical successes. So I'm giving this a B, since it cancels out crits, which is pretty powerful. I mean, it could be worth an A because it is a very nice defensive card. Fearless Strike. As a reaction, play this during a friendly fighter's attack action. Before the attack roll, if that fighter has no supporting fighters, any rolls of single support in the attack roll are successful. So it gives you single supports in your attack, which is nice. I'm going to give that a B. It's a nice little boost to the accuracy. Heal. Push a friendly Grawl up to a number of hexes equal to twice its move characteristic. It must end adjacent to a friendly Olo. I'm giving it a C because, I mean, it's a very nice push, but it applies only to Grawl, who doesn't have the highest likelihood of surviving. Hunting Pack. Play this during a friendly fighter's attack action before the attack roll. If that fighter has 2 or more supporting fighters, any rolls of double support in the attack roll are considered to be rolls of crit. So very nice for swarm attacking. I'm going to give it a B. It just sort of doubles your chances of getting a crit if you've swarmed, which is pretty circumstantial, but could be very rewarding. Godsworn Attack. The first attack action made by a friendly fighter in the next activation has +1 dice. So I'm giving that a B. Just a nice little boost. And that does it for the ploys. So next, looking on to spells. These guys have some interesting spells. First is Enfeeble. It's a gambit spell that costs 2 channel. If the spell is cast, choose an enemy fighter within 4 hexes of the caster. That fighter's attack actions have -1 damage. This spell persists until the fighter is out of action. So it just reduces the damage of an enemy perpetually. I give this an A because against certain warbands who rely on 1 or 2 very strong damage dealing units, this could have a big impact on them. Ensnare. Same cost. If the spell is cast, the fighter gets a -1 move until they're out of action. So for the same reason as Enfeeble, I'm going to give this an A. Glimpse the Future. Costing 1 channel. If this spell is cast, choose a friendly fighter within 4 hexes of the caster. When they make an attack action, you can re-roll 1 dice in the attack roll. This spell persists until the attack action is made or that fighter is out of action, whichever happens first. So it's just a reroll on an attack dice whenever that happens to happen. So I'm gonna give that a B. It's a nice boost accuracy, but it's only a one-time thing. And finally, we got Warding Eye, costing a focus. If this spell is cast, choose a friendly fighter within 4 hexes of the caster. They have +1 defense. This spell persists until the end of the phase or that fighter is out of action. So a nice buff as well. So I'm gonna give this a B because these guys don't have great defense, and a +1 might save them. But I mean, you have so many guys that insisting on keeping one guy alive probably won't have the hugest overall impact in the game. And that does it for the gambits, which typically promote improving defense, equipping upgrades, improving support mechanic, pushing brawl, improving attack accuracy, and impairing enemy fighters. Next, we're going to be looking at the upgrades, starting with Chaos Boon, which gives the fighter -1 wounds, but then +1 damage. So sort of like a great strength, but with a caveat. So I'm going to give that a B because great strength is just better. Then you have Enchanted Collar for Brawl, gives them +1 defense. I'm giving it a C because it's a nice boost, but I don't think it's really worth upgrading Grawl. Ensorcelled Javelin, 3 range, 3 swords, 1 damage, cleave. It has +1 damage. It's basically Jagathra's normal javelin when she charges, except it returns to her so she can keep doing it. So effectively you can have 3 potential charges with this javelin in a game, which is nice if you equip it in the first round. I'm giving it a B though because Jagathra is pretty squishy. Grundon's Path. Unique to Grundon, obviously. When this fighter makes a charge action, rolls of Smash and Fury are both successes in the attack roll. So this increases Grundon's accuracy. I'm giving it a B. It's a nice little buff. Path to Glory. +1 wound, +1 die to this fighter's attack actions. You may apply this upgrade to a fighter that has an upgrade. So I'm giving this an S. This is very nice. Obviously, you're going to be putting an upgrade on your guys at some point, and then if you combine it with Path to Glory, it just provides a very large boost. Whether it's Grundon, whether it's Thedra, +1 dice, +1 wounds is very solid. Point blank shot, unique to Olo, range 3, 2 fury, 1 damage. Basically gives you a shot off on someone who ends their movement adjacent to you, which is nice, but it's low accuracy. You can't drive them back. It's okay, but it's not anything really worth putting in your deck. I'm giving it a C. Siege Trophy. You can play this upgrade using the following reaction. As a reaction, after a friendly fighter's attack action that takes an adjacent enemy fighter out of action, if this card is in your hand, apply this upgrade to that friendly fighter. So you basically get to apply this free upgrade to someone who takes someone out of action, thus inspiring them. So I'm giving it a B because it's okay, but this upgrade doesn't actually do anything besides inspire, and then maybe synergize with Path to Glory if that's your plan. Sean's Path. On a critical hit, this fighter's attack action with range of 1 or 2 have +1 damage. So Sean, extra damage on crit. I'm giving it a D. He rolls 3 dice inspired, which means the odds are okay, but I mean, +1 damage on a crit for a range 1 attack is not exceptional. Thedra's Path, an innate channel. I'm giving it an A. It's nice if you decide to put gambit spells in your deck, otherwise it's not useful. Trained Killer for Grawl. As a reaction during a friendly Olo's attack action, before the attack roll, push this fighter up to 2 hexes. It must end its push adjacent to the target of the attack action. So this becomes good for that whole swarming mechanic and benefits that you get from the gambits, from the gambit ploys. So I'm gonna give it a C because it mainly relies on 2 fighters that have generally low defense. So 2 dodge in the best case scenario and 2 wounds in the best case scenario. And finally, there's Writhing Charm. When exactly 1 damage would be caused to this fighter does not suffer that damage. When this happens, roll a defense dice. On anything but a shield, discard this card. So I'm giving this a D because it's way too circumstantial that you just take a plick of 1 damage, especially if it's equipped on your unit. Most likely your enemy will just choose to attack you with something that does 2 damage. And then you have a high likelihood of actually discarding it whenever this happens, so it could only be a one-time shot, so it's just not very good in my opinion. And that does it for the upgrades, which typically promote increasing attack accuracy, improving Grawl's defense, pushing a friendly crawl, increasing damage, increasing wounds, improving spellcasting success chance, an out-of-turn attack action, a free inspire, and upgrading weapons, but unexceptionally. And here is the full overview of all of this warband's faction-specific cards and how I ranked them in the tier system that I use. So as far as objective goes, I mean, they have 3 that are pretty solid and would pretty reliably be included in a person's deck who's making these. I mean, I find the Oath objective cards to be pretty nice and definitely unique. Gambit's not super exceptional. I mean, there's 3 that are pretty good. I like the spells, but it depends on if you want to take a spell route with this warband. Upgrades, also, there's a couple that are good. I mean, nothing here is really super amazing or breaking the bank. A lot of times you're just going to, in a lot of cases, you'd probably just be better off using the universal cards that are available. All right, and that does it for all of my review. So now I'm going to rate this warband, and here is my overview of that rating. This warband has a very challenging Inspire mechanic. Not challenging in the sense that it's hard to do, but costly. Maybe I should have written very costly inspiring mechanic, which will make you tend to focus upgrades on a few units, therefore only inspiring a few units, so it's very unlikely that all of your units will get inspired. They have low wounds, 3 being the max, mediocre defense, only 2 units getting 2 dodge when inspired, the rest of this warband has garbage defense, making them easy to take out of action, but they do compensate by having many units and good defensive ploys to potentially save some guys that might be taken out of action. They have a good combination of ranged attacks and high movement, which makes it so that they can easily reach enemies and make attacks. And they're also rewarded, particularly for taking out enemy leaders. So because of their range, because of their ranged attacks, it's not unrealistic for them to target leaders who usually have 4+ wounds and kill them and then cash in objective cards by doing so. And finally, as a final point, these guys really are a jack of all trades. You know, they can hold objectives, they can kill, they can do positional play, but they're really a master of none. They have no push cards, they're okay killers, not the best at holding objectives, not the best at killing, not the best at passive play. They die pretty easy, definitely a flawed warband. And because of that, I'm going to be giving this warband a ranking of C. And in my big picture, the way I'm going to be placing them is as C, of course, but I'm going to put them before Farstriders because I do like that they are more versatile than Farstriders. Their Inspire mechanic is a little bit more reliable than Farstriders, and there's just a bit more that they can do in general. So this is how they would fit into my overall grid, and of course, as I keep rating warbands, they will start to fill in this grid as well. So I hope you enjoyed this review. If you have any thoughts or suggestions, please comment below. Please like and subscribe if you like this video and would like to encourage me to make more content that's similar to this. And in the description, I'm going to be posting a link to the balancing video that I'm making for this warband, which are basically the recommendations that I have put together to help make this warband a bit more competitive, particularly against some of the stronger warbands like Thorns of the Briar Queen. So I thank you again for watching and have a nice day.